Chapter 3. Amber woke to find herself sitting in one of the plush leather armchairs in the living room. A quick look around her let her know that it was dark outside, and the fireplace was crackling in the corner. Fire. Right. She immediately lifted her hand to find it. Totally fine. She could have sworn she'd scorched it before she passed out. "You didn't burn your hand. Don't worry. You scared me with that little stunt, though. Turns out you just used too much energy. What were you trying to accomplish there?" Amber blinked a few times. Dad was asking such tough questions, and her mind wasn't fully working again yet. I was trying to knock the dummy over. I did it, didn't I? Amber. Crap. His serious voice. He was sitting forward now, jaw set and dark eyes staring into hers. They were like black pits of coal ready to drown you before even bothering to ignite. What exactly did he want her to say? It only took a few seconds longer for her to relent the truth. I wanted to do fire snaps, like you. I got frustrated. Just wanted to knock the stupid thing over. Her dad relaxed and leaned back into his own chair. He'd started the fireplace and made tea for himself while he waited. All the seriousness was gone from his expression, replaced by a warm smile and eyes that reflected the gentle hearth. Amber, if you're having trouble working the flames, I do happen to be somewhat of a specialist. What was it messing you up? She leaned back into her chair and shifted a bit to get comfortable. She never could seem to get to the perfect position for her neck. I'm not sure. I just couldn't get it to explode. I tried to make it all go off at once, but it didn't do anything. Jonathan rubbed his chin, staring off into space with a look of concentration on his face, as if he was creating the blueprints to a mansion inside his head. A few heartbeats passed before he shook his head and returned his attention to her. I'm sorry, but that could be any number of things. I wasn't watching you closely enough. Should have used astral vision. Amber rolled her eyes. Why did he even call the technique that? Barely anyone in the agency classes had called it astral vision. It was such a basic technique you could hardly attribute it to just one class of mage. Then again, that was the same for almost all astral techniques. They were basic. It was the fallback class for people who couldn't make it in their specialty. Still, she couldn't be too mad at her father for it. He'd fallen in love with an astral. Of course he'd see it in a different light. Dad, do you think you could watch me take another shot at the target? I don't want to be behind everyone else. He looked a little surprised, but she knew him well enough to catch the gleam in his eyes. He was waiting for her to say that, and he had a plan. You sure, Amber? You wiped yourself out with that last attack. You should probably wait until tomorrow. What exactly was he getting at? Did he have something planned for tomorrow? She wasn't going to just go along with that. No, I think I can do it tonight. You'll need to refill your magic. Remember, you have to perform the technique without drawing on your crystal. Do you remember how to perform astral rejuvenation? Amber cursed at herself in her head. She'd walked right into it. She probably remembered how to do that, but it was degrading. The technique was almost useless except for this specific situation. Really, Dad? Show me you can do it once, and I'll restore you for the rest of practice. She sighed. That was probably the best deal she was going to get. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. This part was always so disorienting. She let herself separate from her body, the world around her lighting up with faint white-blue auras. She could see various sources of magic stowed around the house, brighter lights coming from her father and all the crystals he held. He let out a breath, and some of the magic in his body dissipated into the air in front of him. She turned to face herself. A point of light shone from the crystal on her bracelet. A faint trail of light connected her spiritual form to the small stone, and she could feel the power flowing into her from it. A few things started coming back to her. She could halt motion, create shields, and she could take the energy out of that stone and put it wherever she wanted. It was a calming experience, drawing the stone's power into her and letting it flow from one outstretched hand into her unconscious body. That resulted in the strangest feeling of all. She could feel her body being recharged, but she had a constant nagging feeling that it wasn't really happening to her. The two sensations clashed in an overall annoying way. After a minute or so of charging, she willed herself back into her body, finally getting the full brunt of the energy she'd just pumped into herself. Suddenly, she felt more awake than she had in the middle of the day, and her eyes shot open. She found herself staring at her father, who was in turn watching her with far too much fatherly pride. "You don't have to be so excited about me using an astral spell. You move like your mother did when she astral projected. It's a rare treat, just like it was back then." Amber furrowed her brow. Firstly, she had no idea what he was talking about. Her body had stayed motionless that entire time, and her mother didn't need to astral project. Dad must have told her that 1,000,000 times. The only problem was that he wanted her to ask the question. But then again, he was indulging her. She might as well give in a little bit to him. "I thought Mom didn't need to astral project. She just cast the spells normally somehow." Jonathan leaned back in his chair a bit, getting a far-off look in his eyes as he stared up at the ceiling. "That's right, but she still astral projected. She could do it in her sleep, and on late nights, I could force some magic into my eyes and find her watching me in spirit form. Sometimes I still find myself checking for her. Anyways, it's probably time we moved outside and taught you some fire magic, eh?" Before she knew it, she was being helped to her feet and led outside. True to his word, her father watched her more closely this time. According to him, she wasn't condensing her magic enough when she made the shot. He also rather anticlimactically told her why he always created a burning sphere for the spell. Apparently, it helped to make the reaction happen more quickly, acting as a focal point for the magic conversion. Over the course of the next hour, she made some pretty decent progress with it. With just 2 recharges, she'd managed to start consistently knocking down the dummy with her explosions. Still, the spell wasn't nearly as epic or grand as her dad's, and it didn't even send it rolling like Nick had managed on his first try. Beyond that, it would take even more practice to get better. Her dad had already identified the key weak points in her technique after watching her just one time, so there wasn't more that he could do to help her. He assured her that if she just managed to condense her magic further and quickened her magic conversion some more, she'd be able to make it work like him. Unfortunately, an hour's worth of spellcasting was all she could handle, even with her energy stores being replenished by her father. Her body was beginning to protest. That was one of the other disadvantages of charging your body directly instead of pulling energy from a crystal. It strained your body more. Still, it did feel nice to be able to quench her exhaustion so easily. She might keep that one in her back pocket just for comfort's sake. The next morning started earlier than normal. It took until after breakfast for her dad to inform her that they would not be practicing on the dummies again. Connor had managed to knock his over after she'd fallen unconscious, so he'd moved them up to the next stage of their training. Even Nick was yawning as her dad drove them out to some government facility. Despite the early hour, Amber could feel a little bit excited this time. They were applying magic now, instead of just talking about it. Chances were that going to a facility meant they were going into gem-level spells. Hers was already almost full, minus just a little from last night, but she'd already begun recharging it this morning. Why else would they be leaving the house? They pulled in through the regular path, a mile or so of woods, up to the gate that said, City Financing and Banking Bureau. Other agency buildings had cooler covers. Some of them posed as FBI buildings, others as foreign embassies. But no, hers was standard and simple. Something that offered everyone an excuse to walk into the building wearing a suit without looking suspicious. Although, that usually went for most of the cover themes. This place just chose an exceptionally boring one. It made sense if you were trying to keep people from looking in too closely, but it still took a lot of the fun out of being magic when your headquarters was just a finance building. Her father pulled the car up to a small pole with a card reader and a speaker. He pulled a nondescript card from his wallet and swiped it through the reader. A second later, a green LED lit up and the gate in front of them started sliding out of the way. Amber had her own card for this place, but she wasn't sure how much clearance it had. She and the other two followed her dad into the building, and none of them were overly impressed with the display before them. The lobby was relatively normal, and Connor was familiar enough to go swipe his card at the coffee machine to get a fresh cup to drop down and subsequently fill with cappuccino. Her dad went straight to the front desk, talking to the secretary about something or other. He shielded their talk with magic so she couldn't hear. With nothing else to do, Amber went to arguably the most interesting part of the building, the scoreboard. For the sake of not getting hacked, a large amount of information was kept on closed systems or left purely on paper. The scoreboard was one of those things that was mainly displayed on paper. The top active mages in the agency were displayed on a chart, with pamphlets for each of them available nearby. As per usual, the top performers were mystics and elemental mages, all with over 100 kills next to their name. The top spot on the charts varied from month to month, but most people who watched the rankings had their favorites. A wide grin split across her face as she saw the name at the top. Onyx. The agency used her last name as her code name for whatever reason. It was like a celebrity title of sorts. Amber hurriedly moved over to the pamphlets until her fingers landed on Veronica Onyx. She was by far the most interesting active mage. She was a mystic with magic suppression powers, and a gadget mage with a full-body puppet. The puppet was an advanced tool with mechanical joints that she could control remotely via magic. It would be as inefficient as substance magic, but there was a distinct difference in capabilities. The mastery could happen far quicker than training in a single substance, because it was a single piece of equipment, and that piece of equipment could still launch gunpowder-powered punches and restrain monsters with ratcheting garrote wire. Amber flipped through the pamphlet to the diagram of Veronica's puppet. There hadn't been many public updates on what that thing used, but Amber wasn't allowed to take the pamphlets outside the facility, so she didn't get many opportunities to look it over. If it hadn't been for her complete lack of interest in maintaining and lugging around a heavy, complex chunk of metal, she would have strongly considered becoming a gadget mage. She sat down on one of the plush leather couches in the lobby and started looking over the diagram. Besides a few thin shells containing the weaponry, the whole thing was mostly a series of bars and joints in a humanoid shape. It all seemed a lot simpler than it used to, though she still struggled to make sense of a few of the internal diagrams. Her dad clapped his hands together, drawing everyone's attention, then gestured for the three of them to follow him into another room. That went faster than she'd expected. Amber hurried over and looked around the room for whatever targets they'd be shooting at today, only to find a table with a few electronic assemblies waiting for them on a fold-up table. Jonathan walked in front of it and waited expectantly until they sat down on the other side, each with a similar-looking device placed on the table in front of them.
I know you all want to get back to the dangerous spells, but don't worry, today's lesson is a short one. However, I may ramble a bit, since this is a topic close to my heart. As you three very well know, elemental magic was the laughingstock of magic when I first started out. Lightning magic was among one of the most laughed at. It was the end of the weakening cataclysm, and everyone was still getting used to the fact that you couldn't just throw around large elemental effects without repercussions. Still, I had a talent for them, and while you may know a lot about my talents with fire magic, my earliest revelation was with the introduction of more energy-efficient electronics.
Jonathan picked up the assembly in front of Amber, and it came to life. A metal bar shot out and clicked into place, then, in a similar fashion, clicked again and disappeared back into the assembly. An electronic lock. That's what these things were. There was, admittedly, some merit in being able to manipulate simple electronics like that. Not to mention, it was an elemental magic, so it couldn't be all that bad.
I wasn't the only person to figure this out, of course, but I was one of the first, and it helped launch my career as an elemental mage. It doesn't take too much skill or knowledge to master. Look for the motors, and supply power to them. If you want to permanently disable something, look for where there is a moderate amount of resistance, and overload it. Those will usually be the sensitive electronics. Though you may be able to disable those with fire as well, Amber, it's still useful to know. You three work on this for a bit. I have some arrangements to make.
Jonathan set the assembly back in front of Amber and walked to a door where a man in a black suit was waiting for him. The door closed with an audible click, and Amber was suddenly curious to see if the agency building had any protections against the types of techniques they were learning. If anyone would, it would be them. That might also be pointless when there were mages that could control mechanisms directly. She heard a click to her right. Nicholas had already gotten it down. Time to focus. She picked up her lock and tried producing a little electricity. Not much, just as much as it took for her to sustain a candle flame. It wanted to soak into anything metal, but she could slightly direct it. She took a breath to calm herself down, feeling around inside the machine with her electricity. She could get an idea of what she was touching with the electrical charge by how it pulled into different areas and refused to enter others. She guessed that those bits were plastic. The air itself had some resistance too, but overall felt more neutral than anything else. The hardest part was just getting used to the sensations. It hardly felt real, and to then go on trying to map it out in her head was a difficult step. It took a few minutes of diligent work with her eyes closed, but it was soon the equivalent of feeling around in the dark. There were a lot of bits and pieces to move around in there, and much of it was hidden behind plastic shields. She heard a click to her left as Connor made his lock click shut. She grit her teeth, but poking around just a little further, she found something that truly pulled at her electrical powers. Pushing power into that spot resulted in a click from her device as she powered a small motor. That was easier than she'd thought. She could easily probe around inside the machine like that now that she knew what to look for. Curiously, she unlocked her assembly and locked it again. That was incredibly easy. If most mages could figure something like this out in a matter of minutes, then it almost seemed more practical to have mechanical locks to keep a mage out. But again, there were mages who specialized in moving metal. The more she thought about it, the more unlikely it seemed that even these facilities would have mage-proof locks on most doors. It would be impractical, except in the most sensitive areas of the building. From the corner of her vision, she saw Nick creating a rune on the outside of the assembly. Then, Reaching out, he tapped it. The lock clicked out again. He tapped it again. The little metal bar shot back into the assembly. You can do that with runes? She pushed some magic into her eyes and reached out to touch the normally invisible mark. Nothing happened. Yeah, I can code it to myself or to others, though I usually code it not to go off for myself. I hadn't considered using it this way until now. Wanted to see if I could. Your dad is pretty creative. Amber nodded slightly in agreement and withdrew her hand, turning her device over a few times before setting it down. There wasn't much else to do now. This lesson took way too little time. What do you think he's doing in there? He clearly didn't give us enough to do. We all got it down already. Maybe we're supposed to experiment more? Figure out what else we could do? I already got the rune working, so I'm not sure what that would be. I mean, if I wanted to destroy the electronics, it'd be easier for me to use a small flame rather than overload them. Maybe we're supposed to go and crack that lock on the door he went into. Nick chuckled quietly at that suggestion. That was the longest conversation she'd ever had with this boy. He may not be overly interesting, but he knew a bit about magic. She played a few more times with her lock assembly while she waited for her dad to get back. Nick didn't seem interested in saying anything else, and Connor, her usual friend, busied himself by trying to create a rune. He only ended up scorching patterns in the metal of the locking mechanism. Eventually, Jonathan opened the door he'd left through, walking in front of them. Before we go in there, I need to ask you all a question. Why do you want to be battle mages specifically? It's not something you need to answer to me. It's something you need to answer to yourself. If you don't have a reason to fight, you will not be able to make a profession out of this. I'll give you a moment. Amber's father stood waiting in front of them, meeting each of them in the eyes. He turned to her, and she froze. He expected her to answer that? Well, duh. Of course he would. But still, the answer should have been obvious, right? She needed to carry on his legacy. She wanted to advance the world of magic for the good of everyone. That and stop monsters from killing people and causing chaos, but that was a given. Jonathan looked at each of them again, and then, looking satisfied, stood up and gestured for them to follow. He led them to the door he'd last come through and opened it for them. The room was mostly empty, except for a blacked-out pane of glass and a television screen embedded into the wall. Wait, hadn't her father come in here with someone else? She didn't see any other exits. The screen flicked to life, displaying a forested area and several agents in full body armor, rifles at the ready. Someone in the video yelled, "Go!" The camera rushed forward, and the sounds of gunshots went off, overloading the audio of the video as a bear-like creature appeared on screen. It had a long tail that led out to a paddle on the end. It thrashed around, slamming its tail into one of the agents and slamming him into a tree. The man didn't move after that. The numerous bullets didn't seem to have any effect on the creature. It jumped forward and pounced on another agent, biting a large bloody chunk from them and rearing its head back to swallow before turning its attention to the camera. Jonathan paused the video there, moving behind Connor and putting a hand on his shoulder. He was trembling and pale. I probably don't need to tell you all that monsters are incredibly dangerous. Even with the entire arsenal of mages at the agency's disposal, there still aren't enough to prevent regular people from having to fight these things. With one last squeeze on Connor's shoulder, Jonathan walked up to the side of the blackened glass and flicked a switch on the wall. The glass became clear, save for the wire mesh that ran through it. Inside, Chained to the floor was that same bear-like creature from the video. Its tail was held down by at least a dozen metal clamps bolted to the floor. Jonathan leaned against the ledge of the window, staring at the creature intently.
Make no mistake, Avanks need to be killed. Their presence in a water supply can lead to outbreaks of rogue mages, magically enhanced diseases, and can routinely cause cancer in the more mild cases. Even high-caliber bullets take ages to wear down their magical defenses. They've been known to knock missiles out of the air with their tails and shrug off landmine detonations to their unarmored underbellies.
He turned back to look at the three of them, standing up a little taller and meeting each of their eyes in turn. He barely seemed like himself in that moment. When her eyes met his, he felt more like a stranger than her dad. His usual black trench coat was far more sinister in this context.
In 2 weeks, I'll be releasing this thing, and it will be your job to hunt it down and kill it. That's how long you have to back out. It will be hungry. It will want to kill you. It will attack you, and I won't be able to stop it.
He looked Amber in the eyes during that sentence. It was uncomfortable. He was trying to be uncomfortable. It worked a little too well. She started to feel like she was the monster, and now had to go up against this man. It passed, though. She knew the point he was trying to get across, and she accepted it. He seemed to notice the moment that she acknowledged it to herself, and moved on.
That being said, I will give you every bit of combat training that I can in that time frame. During that period, we'll be meeting at the facility. I'll be upping your clearance, so you should be able to get in at any time. Extra training is encouraged.
Amber shuddered and watched her father exit the room. The thrashing beast watched them through the window, still chained to the ground. It was watching them through the glass. Connor lurched forward, trembling as he rested his hands on the window frame and glared back at the beast. Nick, on the other hand, watched the television screen, still paused with the Avank's bloody maw ready to eviscerate whoever the camera was attached to. A creeping sense of loneliness infiltrated her mind, draining away the confidence she'd been trying to build up until realization hit her. It was suddenly a bit harder to breathe. She was barely able to knock over a target without relying on her crystal, and now she had to fight something that could withstand landmines.